Hey, I'm Shar Pittman here, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Woman of Purpose. And tonight I have a great opportunity to interview my wonderful, beautiful friend, Taylor. She flew in from California, not California, Colorado, for a family weekend. And so we grabbed her up, and I'm excited to interview her today. And we're going to talk about this topic, Taylor, of the importance of our self-worth and self-esteem. And you're going to share just a little bit about your story, right?
Right.
I'm excited about that. So we both Googled,
I Googled.
self-worth, because we chatted a little bit today before we met and just kind of, worked through some stuff. And so self-worth, it's a sense of one's own value as a human. And I think it's super important because, especially today and the things that are going on, knowing who we are and knowing our value as a human, is really challenged today. Mm-hmm. And so your story is really, really cool, and your testimony is really important. So I'm super excited for you to share that. So Taylor, what are some things that, let's kind of define this thing of self-worth and in your definition. So when you think of your value and your worth, elaborate on that for me.
Yeah, I think Google got it pretty right.
We're so thankful for Google.
I know Google is great. They probably know everything about me, but it's fine. So I would say self-worth is, just having that sense of knowing I'm valuable and acting accordingly, mm-hmm. because it kind of defines and affects everything we do based upon our self-worth. And so for me, it's just really been realizing that and letting it kind of flow into my life with the decisions I make and the things I do, because before I didn't really have value, so I was kind of picking to everything around me and saying yes to everything around me. But now that my value is like internal, my yeses look different, my actions look different. And so, I would say like making decisions upon my best interest, which is ultimately for the interest of others as well. And so you can kind of take that wrong if you think about it like being selfish, but when we take care of ourselves and we really know that value, we're gonna emanate that same thing and encourage others to do the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because how you think about yourself is really how your behavior is going to be dictated really by how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any self-worth, if you don't feel like you're worthy, then the way that you behave is going to really be destructive.
Yeah, exactly. And even the way that you judge yourself when you don't value yourself, it affects others as well, because suddenly you're kind of using the expectations you use for yourself to determine your worth and value, and then suddenly you see other people the same.
Yeah.
I've had the Holy Spirit tell me so many times, like, you're being judgmental right now. You're being judgmental, but it's because I was really judgmental on myself and hard on myself, because I was trying to prove something, and so, Yeah,
isn't that crazy how important this subject is? Because if we don't have value for ourselves, then it's really hard for us to value somebody else.
Yeah.
Because, that's what it says in the Bible. It says to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so if you can't love yourself, if you don't value yourself, then you have a really hard time valuing others.
Exactly.
And then you pass judgment on somebody else because we've developed a story in our mind because they must not like us because we don't like ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's that destructive thinking then that keeps going on and on and on.
Yeah.
That then it gets into that self-talk.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think I like to look at it as almost a deficit in us. And if we have a deficit within us, it's almost like a hole in the ground. You have a hole, and whatever passes over that hole is going to fall into that hole and fill it, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a deficit within us where our value should already be, anything that goes over is going to fill it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that everything that goes over it's going to be good. Like, it could be bad. That's and then it's going to fill it. And so I think it's important to be operating from a place of like fullness and wholeness, so that things can't come in and tell us what we are,
right.
you know?
And one of the things, how to do that though, is to really be careful on what's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it says to guard your heart above all else, because out of it flows the issues of life.
Yeah.
And who we allow to speak things to us. And that goes along with what determines, or who determines, our self-worth.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of a young woman like you, what are some things, Taylor, that, you know, that you look to or used to look to? You know, this is your testimony, you're sharing your story. So what are some things that you looked to get your self-worth that you maybe shouldn't have?
Yeah. I looked to so many things, honestly. I think the biggest thing was people and their reaction to me. And it started like with my parents, right? Mm-hmm. And with my dad and all of that. And then in high school, it was like wanting to be liked by everybody, middle school, all of those grades. And then even later on in adult life. And then it came to my grades, like getting amazing grades. And
so did that cause you, Taylor, to really strive?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like honestly, striving is probably one of the biggest things I have had to overcome because I didn't feel worth anything. Yeah. Like that whole term scum of the earth, you know, it would take one thing, one error. Like I couldn't receive criticism very well, even because I was so fragile. And so, it was just like I put on a mask and I would kind of morph into what I needed to be accepted by people. And so, yeah, honestly, I think people's the biggest thing is just how I acted. Like I withheld parts of myself because I didn't think they would be accepted or valued by people, or people had a response to them that like made me go inward. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So any kind of correction or any kind of even somebody to give you, you know, like a suggestion of any sort, because your self-worth, you looked at yourself as worthless or scum of the earth, then anything anybody would say that would really put you probably deeper in a hole. Yeah.
And I also did that to myself. So it was like people's correction and then my own. I was always analyzing like, what can I do better? How can I grow in character? As like a high schooler, middle school, like that's kind of crazy for somebody who, you know, isn't maybe, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. And so yeah, it was whenever people tried to talk into my life, I was super sensitive, couldn't really receive that well. And so I think also people just wouldn't really bring that stuff to me all the time either, because they knew I was sensitive. Right. But
and so you know, we look, I think especially as females, I don't know about males, but females, it's really a lot of, wouldn't you think, based on like friendship, the friendship group that you have, appearance, I think is another really huge thing. Whether we're in a relationship, you know, you're single. And so that sometimes too can, you know, determine our self-worth if we, you know, if we allow it to. Like you said, our parents, coaches, teachers, jobs, you know, things like that. Really, if we're not careful, they will determine our self-worth. That's why it's important that we determine our self-worth. And we determine our value based on what God says our value is. You know, and that's a journey that you have been on for a while. And I've seen such a tremendous growth in you and confidence in you. And that's because you put the work in. The one thing that you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And I think that's a lot in women, is that it's really hard for a woman to be vulnerable and to be transparent and authentic, because if my self-worth and self-value isn't good, then I'm afraid to be vulnerable and authentic, because I'm afraid you're going to reject me. If people knew the truth about me, then they're really not going to like me. And so that's how we can get into that downward, help me.
Downward spiral.
Thank you. Downward spiral. It's been a long day. You know, that path that gets us in a pit. And then it's really hard for us to get out, especially when we have that inward, you know, feeling about ourselves. And then our self-talk becomes very negative, and then it's just like, it's like, help me, Jesus,
Yeah.
So,
for
so
real.
Taylor, so what are some things then that with this self-talk and your self-worth and stuff like that, what are some things that caused you to get in that pit?
Yeah, so I think, my self-talk kind of developed a lot in how I was raised and learned mindsets growing up. And so it's weird how as a kid you kind of make conclusions and you fill
Yeah.
in the blanks, and
Yeah.
you just don't have the emotional intelligence to really understand why people's actions are the way they are. And so I became very performance based, I think, in the sense of just trying to be seen and trying to be enough. Like I just never felt good enough for
because your childhood, Taylor, was, it was, your parents were divorced when you were little, and so there's a lot of already just in that there's rejection.
Yeah.
And somehow kids, people, you hear this a lot where, the kids are young enough and, they'll be fine. But kids have a way of making, situations their fault.
Yeah.
Like what did I do? What could I have done even being little?
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing. Your childhood really kind of started that whole negative self-talk.
Yeah, exactly. I remember from a young age having thoughts of like, well, if X parent really loved me, they would choose me over this. And then they wouldn't. So then I was like, oh, okay, I'm not important enough. So the things that I did were the things that I allowed to like speak to me my value. Like if I can do really good at this, or if I can be perfect, or if I can just be enough in some form or another, then I can inadvertently be enough in this area that I wasn't enough when it really wasn't about me.
Right.
And so, I think the self-talk kind of started from there of just like, you're not enough, Taylor. The world would be better without you. And also because
even though those things were never said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there were things that were not said. That's the conclusion that you got.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's so interesting because we're really impacted by things that are spoken to us, but we're also really impacted by things that are spoken without even a word. Like in the spaces of life, in the spaces of situations where things weren't spoken to bring clarity, and then we conclude something. And I did that a lot because I'm an overthinker.
Yeah,
and
I
my
think
mind,
most women are.
Yeah, for real. And I've learned to like really love my mind, but on the flip side of that, it's, I just thought of a lot of things that weren't always true, but I wasn't communicating and I wasn't having those things kind of corrected in me. So I would say my self-talk developed from childhood, but then I really just took the reins and ran with it.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know how many negative things I had operating under the surface until I just saw these cycles and patterns in my life, in relationships. Like relationships haven't always been the easiest for me. I've like cycled through friends, and I mean that sounds kind of bad, but I think because I had so much kind of like trauma and stuff to work through, I didn't know how to process anything, so I had like a constant state of sadness. And when you're young, you just don't know how to deal with that, and so when those relationships would go awry, then I'd really feel like the pits, and then maybe it would come back around. And so people were really kind of like my crutch. And I think there definitely was even some like codependency in areas to find my value of like, tell me good things.
Right.
Tell me you love me.
Approval. You wanted to be validated.
Yeah.
And you wanted your feelings to be validated. But when you like didn't even believe that you were worth being validated, that even the validation that you were getting probably was just like, you just were a bucket with holes. Yeah,
it just goes one in and out. And also I will say, I think we develop a lot of our worth based upon kind of the identity of our family too sometimes.
Sure, yes.
And so I remember even feeling a lot of that before I could even organically just discover that for myself, just feeling shame. I remember like my teachers would be like, oh, this is your parent.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, yep.
Yeah.
And there was just shame already
Yeah.
from elementary school, you
Yep.
know, all the way to when I graduated.
Yeah.
And so I think I was taking on kind of the worth that I already felt was placed on my family to a degree, you know. And
Well, and we take on like our parents' dysfunction, thinking that it's ours. You know, it was the same way with me. When people would find out who my dad was, they're like, oh, so you're, Frank's daughter,
Yeah.
because my dad he was an alcoholic and known for being mean and angry and telling people off and stuff. And so somehow we become like with the shame, or we become, think that we're like our parents in a sense, and so there is that thing that you carry.
Yeah. You really have to separate and take on your identity.
Yeah.
Because
It's hard to take your identity when somebody else tells you who you are.
Yeah.
People used to tell me, a lot of my family would tell me, you're just like your dad. You're just like your dad. You're just like your dad.
Yeah.
And so you get that. And it's like the person that you struggled with, and the person that never validated you, the person that never, you felt like, I know that he loved me, but felt like he, never loved me or approved of me. They're telling me I'm like him. And so it scars you. So then you carry that identity thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be just like that. And it's crazy, the things that you think that are not true. And that's what you were saying, is how you overthink. And then you think things that are not true, but then they're your truth.
Yeah.
And then when people try to tell you the truth, it's hard to undo the truth that you've determined was truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so crazy that we can literally live our whole lives based off of such a false foundation.
Yeah.
And I really saw that in the past, like, I would say 7 years of my life, of just honestly becoming undone in so many things.
Yeah.
Because the Lord really needed to create a new foundation.
Yeah.
And we just don't really realize how many things are operating in our foundation and like holding us up. And I remember reading a book by Lisa Turkis, actually, and she was giving this analogy of this board. I think they had, or maybe it wasn't even an analogy, it might have been a real story, but basically a board, and it needed to be replaced. And I was thinking of, just how I felt in a lot of ways, like you step on a board that's rickety and you could fall through the floor, and it's like, that's such an unsteady foundation. And when we don't, kind of like that hole I was talking about earlier, when we don't have, that just wholeness and fullness that we're operating from, it's so just rickety, and one person could step on it and fall right through, and you're like, oh, there, I feel zero again, you know what I mean? And so, I remember the first time I had an argument with a parent, and it was the first time that those arguments used to make me feel so worthless. And it was the first time I walked away feeling whole. But it was only because I had really healed and learned my worth and knew that I wasn't the reason.
Right.
Like I was maybe part of the thing that we were arguing about, but I wasn't like a problem. And I had such tenderness in my heart. And it was just such a crazy difference from like rickety board to like stable, strong, concrete foundation. Because when we have like a strong foundation of who we are and we know our value, relationship just changes.
Right.
It
And
just
if
looks
your
different.
self-worth is not, your self-esteem is in the hole, then it is absolutely impossible to have healthy conflict.
Yeah.
Because conflict and things is just a normal way of life. But when I am in a tank and my tank is never full, and I never feel valued, I never feel like I'm worthy, so then any kind of conflict is going to be, I'm going to take it as a personal attack.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it as, okay, there we go again, something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
And how I would respond would be defensive and demeaning to the other person, so that I would at least get some kind of self-value, some kind of value for me, which is so twisted. But that's really how that works, and the importance of recognizing. And the thing is like I said before, it's like you can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
And there is something to understanding that, like for me and for you, the self-worth thing came from childhood.
Yeah.
And like I believe for most women, that's probably where it comes from is from our childhood, whether it, good or bad, or, whatever, just things that a teacher says or somebody says, it penetrates us.
Yeah.
And to realize where that comes from, because then to deal with it, otherwise you're always trying to fix your behavior.
Yeah.
And thinking less of yourself because I can't believe I acted like that. I can't believe I behaved like that. Because that's what self-worth, we behave according to how we
judge ourselves, we punish ourselves.
Exactly, constantly. And so when you realize that that's where it comes from, then it's like, okay, so I'm okay. I'm a victim, but I'm not going to live like a victim.
Yeah.
And I'm going to determine who I really am. And I'm going to determine my self-worth, according to what the Word of God says for us, because we believe in Jesus and we believe in the Word of God. That really becomes our foundation.
Yeah.
And get it to a point of just something we read to actually making that foundational in our lives.
Yeah, and I think doing that really requires being honest with ourselves, kind of like what you touched on of we have to acknowledge it. And I think a lot of us are scared to acknowledge things about ourselves and really dive into what do I actually believe, because our self-worth isn't always super strong. So we go in and we're just kind of like beside ourselves, like, I suck, I'm the worst ever, But it's in those places that we're really brutally honest with ourselves that we can kind of scrape away some of the stuff that's not supposed to be there and rebuild something. But yeah, it can only be done with God, because honestly, we're just like humans moving in this life, experiencing it. And if we determine how valuable we are based off of what people say or do to us, there's strangers on the street that could treat me like crap. You know what I mean? And they don't know me. And so, it's just so important. Like, it's so important to find that internally. And the only way you can is to really connect to God and his heart, because Jesus wouldn't have died for something that wasn't valuable. And when we don't value ourselves, we're saying, Jesus, what you did on the cross didn't actually matter. Like, you died for trash, or like you died for something that wasn't worth anything. How do you feel dying a vain death? That's really what we're saying. I think when we kind of hold it up to the light like that, it's like, oh yeah, you're so right. Okay, Jesus, what do your actions tell me? Well, you came and you went to the worst people and you reached into their world and you offered them something different. And so, And
it's hard to even see that if we don't first believe that we're worth it. And so that's getting to know. I always say this, it's like, I can't know who I am until I first get to know the one who actually created me. And that kind of starts that whole cycle of being able then to forgive, because even if my self-worth is not on a good foundation, then it's going to be impossible for me to actually forgive the people that hurt me and the people that determined my self-worth. And so as we go down that path, that's why it's so important that this subject, because I deal with a lot of women, especially younger women, that the basis of their self-worth comes really the root of it is from childhood. And when you expose the lie, then the lie no longer has a hold on you, and then you're able to see truth. And so that's the importance of knowing that, number one, that we're not the only ones. That's why I think this podcast is so important. And it's because it's not to encourage, and I say this all the time, and I'm going to continue saying it, is this, I don't want this to be encouraging to you. I want this to be empowering to you. Because if it's encouraging, then it's a constant thing that somebody else has got to do for you. But if it's empowering, then I'm giving you the tools for you to apply so that you can do it for yourself. And so I believe that that's what this podcast is going to do. And I believe that you sharing your story, Taylor, is going to be so impactful for young women, especially that are listening to this, because they're going to see how you went from believing that you were scum of the earth to believing that I am somebody that is worth being loved. And I'm someone that is worth being treated with respect. And then you see things so differently. That's kind of what has helped you come to this confidence, is because now you can share the story with that no shame. because you're not your past, you're not your parents' mistakes, you're not even your past mistakes.
Yeah.
And so the things that you're walking in now are just absolutely beautiful. And so I can't wait to continue on the next episode, how we're going to really get into your testimony and where you were and the pit that you were in because of how you viewed yourself, and where you are today and how you all came out of that. So I'm really excited to get into that. So anyway, so thank you for joining us on this episode of Woman of Purpose. Stay tuned for the next episode with Taylor Johnson.